Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another episode of Season 2 of the Rule 34 podcast. I'm your host, Jack, joined by my fellow guest.
It's Mr. Solis.
Alright, and so the last time we met was WWE Survivor Series, covering that. And as we mentioned there, or at least towards like the end of that episode, we mentioned, hey, Wargames is coming up. And we both agreed, yeah, let's tune in to watch it, get that last, essentially pay-per-view in before, whatever the date we decide will be, the day we talk about our top 10 matches of the year.
That's right, which I have not sorted. But I did watch this show, Jack, with a keen eye to see if anything that happened last night was going to make my list.
Yeah, I went in with the same mindset, especially because, this is the last, technically, for at least, big companies like WWE, AEW, New Japan, Impact. This is the last big pay-per-view in a sense of the year. And so I was like, okay, this is their last shot to get something in, because though maybe something can happen before whatever week it is that we make that list, for the most part, I know this is like the last opportunity, because as we mentioned before, I'm pretty sure though an interesting matchup may appear on TV, things like commercials and pictures by pictures will kind of keep it from being in the match of the year contender.
Yeah, for sure. I wonder, I don't know what winter is coming is going to be like for AEW.
Yeah.
Is any of those matches handled with limited or no commercial interruption? Because that's shaping up to be something interesting. Yeah.
It's like it always happens, and even looking in the previous year, some of the matches that have happened on TV, it's always it looks interesting, and sometimes a lot of the matches are really good, but it's like I mentioned before, I think the commercials just really take you out of it and really breaks the immersion that one has into the match.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so it's for the most part, that's why you usually only see pay-per-view type matches on my list, or in the sense the way New Japan or Stardom does it, where they don't really have commercials even during their regular shows. It's just straight action for however many minutes the match is.
And mine is probably going to be a lot of the same, the same composition of pay-per-view matches, if only because I don't have cable.
Yeah.
So, I think, Jack, there's a ton of AEW matches that, I won't even think about because I don't watch them. But, Adam Cole's and Bryan Danielson, and they've been fighting all sorts of people. And I'm like, yeah, I wonder how that match with Fives was, or Bryan Danielson versus Cole Cabana. And then there's Dark, and who has the time? So what I'm saying is, when we cover these matches, and the listener can think of one we missed, forgive us.
Yeah,
but we are only human.
There's one thing I just want to real quickly ask, because I know you went to Resurgence, correct?
Yeah.
I want to know, do you think experience any of those matches in person might affect your rating of them, or do you think it'll increase the way you remembered it?
I know what you mean, and I want to be as objective and as clinical as possible in my designations. Does a match appear from that card on my list? Yes, but I think I would have chosen it even if I watched it from home.
Yeah, because that was just the one thing I want, because that's one thing I know definitely a lot of people consider at times is, hey, did I watch that match live, Mm-hmm. And even in the regular sense of watching it, as it's happening even at home, because I think that's another thing we also mentioned when discussing, whether we can put matches on our list was, though it may be good if we catch it after already being spoiled of who won or what the finish was, it's tough to again have that immersion in it.
Yeah, so there's I'm sure a bunch of New Japan matches that I would have added to the list if they weren't spoiled for me. I didn't even watch them.
Yeah, but yeah, so this was technically for the most part for both of us that last stop for essentially the cutoff for match of the year contenders.
Agreed.
But also,
and we've got some big candidates. We got some folks that, they set up something good with this card.
Yeah, I believe, if I remember correctly, we briefly discussed it probably on one of the episodes, but really, the last time we covered NXT was when they were still essentially 1.0, the black and gold brand.
Yeah, what was the last card we covered?
Takeover, is it 36?
Was that like in April?
That was during SummerSlam weekend.
Oh, SummerSlam weekend.
Let me just double check. Yes, this was the one that happened after SummerSlam, because SummerSlam happened on a Saturday.
Ooh, yes. The main event was
Joe versus Cross.
Goodness gracious, Cross is still at NXT, and Joe is at the helm, of course. Oh my!
Yeah, so to show just how much has changed during this time, the card had Cross versus Joe in the main event, Raquel versus Dakota for the women's title, Walter versus Dragunov for the UK title.
Yes, of course.
O'Reilly and Cole 2 out of 3 falls.
I fell asleep through.
And Cameron Grimes versus LA Knight for the $1 Million Championship.
Gosh, that's right. That's absolutely right.
And it's crazy because you look at that card and, Raquel and Dakota are still there, but Raquel's no longer women's champion. Neither of the men in the men's title match are one of them is technically injured, quote unquote, because we don't really know the details of that, but the champion walking in is no longer with the company. Adam Cole is no longer with the company, and after last night, it's looking like maybe Kyle O'Reilly might not be there, but we'll get into that later.
Right.
And, Cameron Grimes and LA Knight are still there, and Walter and Dragunov are still there, of course, respectively, under NXT UK brand.
Yes, correct. And how funny is it that LA Knight has found himself on the black and gold side of things since he just showed up?
Yeah, that was one thing my dad brought.
A lot of these 2.0 characters were introduced 2 months ago, and LA Knight was introduced about 4 months ago.
Yeah, and, obviously the 2.0 change came, it was to rebrand the brand, and, essentially put forth this new type of notion of, like, it's going to be back to its developmental stage like it used to be and focus on the younger guys, And
I'm going to bring that point up, right? I feel like NXT 1.0 strayed away from development, and they were, like, presenting this established roster of talent, right? It was a third brand. Now we're developing, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to bring that up from time to time as a point of contention for me.
Yeah. And, it's succeeded in some parts, as obviously a lot of the new guys, for the most part, from what you can tell from crowd reaction and online talk, a lot of them are getting over, some of them aren't. And in a way, I want to say that's technically how I view NXT 2.0, because what it is to me is very throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks. And like essentially what they've done is, because it's going back to true developmental, they're just throwing these guys out there, and it's like if they succeed, they succeed. If not, either rework with them or, like, what seems to be the mindset is just straight up release them, but it's something that me and my dad talked about, because it was almost a point of criticism from us. It's not that we don't enjoy some of the stuff on 2.0 still, but, like, the change happened very quickly, where it was like they immediately started throwing a ton of new guys, new characters, new gimmicks just right out there, and essentially, like, there's still a bunch of, like, the OG NXT guys from 1.0 there from a couple months ago, but, like, they slowly kind of phased a lot of them out, or are trying to rework new gimmicks with them or new partnerships and stuff.
Yeah.
So it was like they like I said, there was a lot of throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, and like I said, some were successful and some were not.
And I would like to take this moment before we start digging into the matches to shout out the crowd, or not shout out the crowd, but just point out the crowd and question the crowd. Jack, we're at the what do they call that place that they film out of? I think they're still in Florida, right?
Yeah, it's the CWC, I believe is what they call it.
Right. I forget what that stands for.
Capital Wrestling Center.
The Capitol Wrestling Center. It's the home of the NXT recording. So you got this small warehouse full of people, and I can't tell like if they're being sincere. Like, are they sincerely cheering the stuff that I hear them cheering? Because this company is not above piping in crowd noise, but I hear the things that they're saying, and I go, I don't think they have that on record. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's a sincere reaction, or is it? How many plants we got, Jack? How many people are on the payroll in that room? Like, I want to know, like, what's happening? And you know what I heard about the old NXT when they were out of Full Sail University? That crowd was like so niche, and it was the same people every week. You know what I mean? And they just like took over and cheered anything and everything. So it seemed like everything was getting over, but they began to wonder, oh, will this get over with the world, or is it like uniquely this group of people's thing that they cherish and they like support?
Yeah, I have noticed that too, where it's like like the crowd can be confusing in the CWC. Like it was weird. A lot of guys who you thought were over were getting booed. A lot of people were getting cheered, even though, like, you know, online fanfare wasn't the same. So it was really, I do understand what you're saying. Like, it's really confusing as to...
Well, so one of my favorite cheers last night was during a match. It was Roderick Strong's match, where half the crowd chants, that was a 3, because it was a kick out. That was 3. And then the other half started chanting, that was 2. And I go, it's not recorded because that's a new one. Yeah, it was so weird, but I was excited. I mean, it made me feel excited about the whole night's event. And I tell you what, Jack, with all the new faces and all the new names, I came into last night's event with an open mind, perhaps the biggest open mind I've ever walked into anything with. It was so open, Jack, that I could have been convinced that Die Hard is a Christmas movie.
Yeah, and you know, I think that pretty much sums up the way I've essentially, like, when they first started the NXT 2.0 thing, I went in with optimism, as we obviously like to do on this podcast, you know, try and stay optimistic and stuff. And even though I haven't kept up with it a lot, I've still, you know, kept up with, again, similarly, kept up with at least, like, the results and, like, any of the news regarding it. And I still am, like, even though I'm, like, kind of, like, watching from a distance, I'm still optimistic that they're going to get things right. And, you know, they do things, a lot of things right. I will say one upgrade that I do like over the presentation now versus old is it's not as dark, you know?
Like, it is very bright.
Yeah.
It is literally quite bright.
Yeah. Obviously, you know, maybe some argue it's too bright, but it's definitely an upgrade, in my opinion, at least from, like, the Full Sail and early Capitol Wrestling Center days, where it was, like, very dark with only, like, with very limited lighting, you know? And I guess it adds to its vibrancy, but, you know, as we'll continue to get through the card, you know, it was, like, I think it was similar to the way my dad felt also, where it was just, it's a lot of new stuff, so you gotta go in with a very open mindset in order to enjoy it.
I did, and at the end of this card review, Jackie, you and me, we're going to name the new superstar who stood out to us the most, male or female, and we're also going to name which superstar made us, like, the most befuddled for existing. Because there's a few candidates for that category, and I want to know who befuddled you the most.
All right. But so, we'll start off. First match of the night. Starting off, much like last year's Wargames, we start off with actually, as we've started off since 2019, we start off with the women's Wargames match.
You're right. Yeah, no, I definitely remember them both very clearly, and they're right. The women's Wargames match opened the last 3 shows. Huh.
Yeah.
And here's a onslaught of competitors. It's Dakota Kai and Toxic Attraction, who are Gigi Dolan, JC Jane, and Mandy Rose, taking on the good team, which is Cora Jade, Io Shirai, Kaylee Ray, and Raquel Gonzalez.
And one thing I forgot to mention is that, with the introduction of NXT 2.0, we were essentially told that there would be a lot of main roster sort of like tropes implemented to NXT 2.0 in development. And I only bring this up because the biggest key, essentially the biggest thing that shows that this was true is Raquel and Io were on the same team. When less than a couple months ago, they were duking it out, and a year ago at Wargames, they were on opposite teams.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend, Jack. And Toxic Attraction has taken over this division, and they must be stopped. And also Dakota Kai.
Yeah, but so as you mentioned,
I think what I hear you saying, Jack, is that Raquel Gonzalez's recent face turn was ineffective.
Yeah, but what'd you think of the match, especially as an opener to the show?
And I'll tell you what, Jack, when I was going into the show and looking at the card, there's just so many competitors that they're throwing in a 2-ring size cage, I was just really worried. I was terrified. And then each of them brought in a different weapon, and they filled the 2 rings with weapons. And I just think, somebody's going to get hurt, to the point where it isn't fun. But, and then Cora Jade, I don't know nothing about, but she's they call her the youngest competitor to ever compete in a Wargames match. And you think at some point, we should be really considerate of who we put in this very violent match, right?
Yeah, I remember there being similar criticisms of the ladder match that took place at Halloween Havoc.
Yes.
Where,
it's hey, let's get all these new competitors who are just figuring out the grappling and put them with a bunch of steel. Goodness gracious.
Yeah, and, obviously, as I've mentioned, a lot of gimmicks and characters were implemented in 2.0, and it's similar here where you have Toxic Attraction as a faction and they have their gimmick, and Cora Jade's gimmick I believe is Skater Girl.
She had a skateboard. It was a weapon.
Yeah, and to me it makes me think, at least based off of the way they've portrayed her in the build up and especially this match, it makes me think they're trying to build her up like a Jeff Hardy type figure where, they're just like an energetic person that tries to connect with the crowd through their energeticness,
I hear you. She's it's interesting to think about it in retrospect, but her colors, the colors of her outfit match the NXT 2.0 kind of color scheme, overall. She's fun. I guess she's supposed to be fun. I think the weapons that were introduced in the match, I think, generally hid some of the gaps in the skill level of all the competitors involved, right? It's we're not going to try to do anything too fancy. We're going to throw around some trash cans and some kendo sticks. I think it kind of filled the gap because I had this thought and it was affirmed for me later. I'll tell you later when it was affirmed. But people still looked like they were kind of moving slow and setting up spots and they were taking too long.
Yeah. There was definitely points of notice of that too. And oh wait, no. Okay, so I was gonna say I'm pretty sure she started the match, but then I remember Kaylee Ray was the one that started for their team.
Mm-hmm.
But so yeah, it was really just to spotlight these new people, even though as you mentioned at the start, a lot of people question the safety of throwing such, in a sense, green people into the ring with such a stipulation, but they did their best to maximize their strengths, minimize their weaknesses, and hide the weaknesses of it.
Mm-hmm.
Which was showcased through a lot of the weapons. Each woman brought in weapons, and then of course, kind of I want to say the best part of 2.0 is that they did it completely phase out veterans. So you still have someone like EO in there to help out and guide, with her veteran presence. And even someone like Mandy Rose, who isn't necessarily a veteran, like years of competing wise, but, has experience on the main roster, has competed in a couple of matches, not necessarily anything like this, because I remember my dad did ask me if Mandy Rose ever competed in a match like this, and I told him the most that I know she's competed in is Elimination Chamber.
Right. She put it on Twitter. She said, I've been in ladder. She's been in Money in the Bank, and she's been in Elimination Chamber. She's been on Rumble, and she's like, I've done things. And you're like, God, she really has. And to jump around, I was very not amused. I was very entertained, Jack, because she's the leader of the group. I'm very entertained by the fact that she went in last, and she generally incurred the least amount of damage of everyone. It was such a Mandy Rose thing to do. That's some good character, Jack. She walks in, everyone's all beat up and torn apart, and she's going to pick up from the scraps. I want to zoom in, Jack, on my favorite part of the match. I think it's the same as yours. And it has to do with young Jeff Hardy like Cora Jade. Because what she do, Jack, that's so like Jeff Hardy.
So they have a table set up and they have JC Jane on it. And when I say they, Io Shirai and Kaylee Ray get her set up like that. And, to play up a lot of the comedic effect that we've seen a lot in NXT 2.0 since its rebrand, instead of just, simply like going for the move, Io and Kaylee Ray both decide to settle who's going to perform a move onto JC Jane on the table by doing rock, paper, scissors. And that's when Cora Jade just pushes both of them aside and climbs all the way to the very top of the cage to do a dive. And I say dive because it looked like she was maybe going just for a simple splash. But then at the last second, she rotates and, kind of scared my dad and I because we thought she almost under-rotated into a swanton.
And, for what happens later, I wonder how purposeful even that was. Because she goes through Jade, breaks the table, and seemingly dislocates her shoulder. And Jack, she's 20. I just looked it up. She's 20 and she looks 15. And she just put herself through a table. She took the big spot from the two veterans and, pushed them aside. And now we come to my favorite part of the match because I think the girl hurt herself. I'm convinced, Jack. My disbelief, it's out there amongst the dogs that you might hear outside my building. They're wrestling with it. And you got referees standing at the door of that cage about to try to give medical assistance to Cora Jade. And then what happens, Jack?
So Io Shirai goes, and I think at this point everyone has been in the ring, so Wargames is technically officially started, and so because at any point they can lose, you look at this as, adding on to the character of Io never wanting to lose. She just kind of looks at the medical staff and is like hearing their pleas to let Cora out, and she just looks at them and goes, I got this, as she closes the door on them and proceeds to like start comforting Cora before proceeding to the knowledge of the crowd, pop her shoulder back into place.
It was an incredible scene. And it wasn't the case that everyone was in the ring because Mandy Rose hadn't come in. And I say that because now Cora Jade's got her shoulder popped in. She's moved herself as far away from the action as possible. And when Mandy Rose, the dastardly leader of this evil group, comes in, what does she do? She makes a beeline for Cora Jade and starts pulling her by her bad arm. And I'm like, this is, that's good character building. So good. She tries to pin her, and it doesn't work. She kicks out, and they both look surprised.
Yeah. And, I want to bring this up real quick because it seemed like it was going to be an important spot, but I don't know if anything actually came of it or if my dad and I just missed it. But they brought in a duffel bag, but I don't remember ever seeing them use it.
I also don't think anything came out of the duffel bag, the most interesting of all the weapons that were introduced. Whoops.
Yeah. And we almost saw Io fly with a trash can again, but they stopped her before she put it on. But Dakota got stuffed into a trash can and then proceeded to got spun around by Raquel.
Yep, that was incredible.
Yeah.
What were a couple of other spots, Jack, that stood out to you?
This isn't necessarily like a good spot that stood out, but it was one of those spots that me and my dad were like, they probably thought that was gonna go better than it looked. But towards the beginning, Kaylee Ray and Dakota set up like all those kendo sticks between the two rings.
That was silly. That was contrived.
Yeah,
that was some Sasha Banks Bailey contrived.
Yeah, and my dad was like, "Well, this isn't like Sasha and Bailey where it's stable enough to look like it does damage." Like the moment they did the move on it, everyone kind of was just like, that didn't look like as effective as they probably thought it was going to."
Yeah, I agree.
And then going back to your point about the crowd, trying to figure out what characters they don't like, they were really chanting for Gigi to come into the match.
I heard that. I was really surprised. And again, I think in my mind, no, they definitely don't have a Gigi Dolan chant on file. This is a sincere reaction from this group. They were cheering her before she came out and then while she came out and for a considerable amount of time while she was in the ring.
Yeah, and so, and then there was obviously, I'm pretty sure they did the classic spot that they always do where the two teams face off and then like go at it,
Mm-hmm.
Like
that's
Civil War poster.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And the big finish comes when Raquel gives that big old choke slam to JC Jane, and then she does something to
her and Dolan both give each other a big boot.
That's right. And so while everyone's down, we've got Cora Jade, 20 going on 12, crawl over, cover JC Jane, and get the big pin for her team. She looked like one of my students, Jack.
Yeah, she definitely is really young, especially like, I can't say for wrestling standards when you got Japan out there having people compete at like age 15 at times from what I've seen. But, for American standards, yeah, she's definitely young.
How many of them cry as much as Cora did? And like, maybe that's good character building. I mean, she has all the right to cry. It's like, if she's in the amount of pain I think she's in. But again, it's like, I certainly hope they make something of her in the next year or two,
Yeah.
Goodness gracious.
And overall, what'd you think of the match?
I was entertained. I went in not knowing half the roster, half the teams, and there was a couple of spots that worked well. And there was a couple of instances that were like, oh, we're getting really brutal. Yeah, this is intense. And the best part, Jack, I wasn't sure which way it was going to go. I definitely thought that they could have given this to Toxic Attraction. But to get the good guy win at the beginning of the show, it set the mood right for me.
Yeah, and, real quickly, I just remembered the spot because you talked about, at some points you said they were getting real brutal. They even showed a replay of it. There was a spot where, I forget who she was hitting. It might have been Dakota Kai or Cora Jade, but Gigi Dolan at one point was really laying like the forearm.
She sure was. And I'm there going, oh, I'm catching up to what these people in the crowd already know.
Yeah.
She may be actually the more veteran of her team, right? Mandy Rose is the leader and the reigning NXT women's champion. But I actually think Gigi probably has more experience than the other two.
Yeah, I think so. Especially, knowing her.
Formerly known as Priscilla Kelly.
Yeah. But so yeah, really entertaining match. I thought it was a pretty good start to the show, and like you said, it kind of set the pace and tone for the rest of the night. Agreed. And so the next match is for the NXT Tag Titles, which is another thing that's changed since NXT Takeover 36. Is those titles changed as well from MSK to Imperium.
And I think before we talk about the match, we should talk about what MSK are doing nowadays. Because we did get a vignette before this match. Oh, yeah. So they aired, instead of commercials, they aired a ton of vignettes, like back to back. A ton of them. Uh-huh. And so there was the MSK vignette where I forget what the thing is called that they're trying to visit. It's a shaman. They're looking for a shaman.
Yeah, and I only know about this storyline because I saw the clip where they apparently get pulled over by some cops.
Yeah.
And it was. I found it funny because it was like they thought they were going over the speed limit, and then they were told they were driving at like 10 miles per hour, and that's why they got pulled over.
Because, Jack, in NXT 2.0, everyone's got to have a character, and their character apparently are potheads. Implied bros.
Yeah, it's definitely more implied than Matt Riddle's character in NXT and even main roster. And I saw reports, that they want NXT 2.0 to be more mature, and so you assume that's why they're getting more gimmicks like this, where they're leaning more into that. And, though they're not explicitly stating it, that's what the assumption you get based off of the vignettes and stuff.
So, Jack, do you have any predictions as to who the Shaman, a tag team specialist, could possibly be?
I'm either trying to think maybe who's a veteran they might bring in, or who's like maybe someone who's been off TV for a while, and it's like nothing really is coming to my head as to who this could be.
Cultaholic, a YouTube channel I mention from time to time, suspect it's Rob Van Dam.
I was thinking that too, but then there's also the part of me that was like, do I remember Rob Van Dam being a tag team specialist,
He was champion with Kane.
True.
And I'm trying to think if he held it with anyone else. Rey Mysterio? That sounds like an oddball pairing they would have tried.
Yeah, especially in the early SmackDown days.
Yeah.
Like the mid. Who
knows? Maybe they're gonna go find Matt Riddle after all. Because his like they show MSK open a door, smoke billows out, hiding who they're gonna meet. It could be Matt Riddle.
I mean, Matt Riddle is a former NXT champion
and a current tag team champion.
Yeah. Which continues to just remind me how terrible my Matt Riddle RK Bro prediction ages. Day by day.
Hey, we're in December now. We're talking about 26 days, Jack. 26 for Christmas. I'm buying an RK Bro shirt, the bad one with like those snake riding a scooter. Because goodness.
And speaking of formidable tag teams, as I mentioned, it's the tag team Imperium Defender titles against Von Wagner, a new 2.0 guy, and very experienced tag team wrestler Kyle O'Reilly.
I really appreciate, Jack, how distinct you've made those two descriptions. You said very accomplished tag team wrestler Kyle O'Reilly and Von Wagner.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what, Jack, I absolutely hated the idea of O'Reilly and Wagner winning. So much that they were like reverse hope spots. Whenever it looked like Kyle O'Reilly and Wagner were going to win, my heart sank and I was clutching at the edge of my seat. And then Wagner would power out.
Yeah, obviously I'm not on the train of every talent should leave and join AEW, But more than anything, I think Kyle should go if he doesn't plan to stay. Because, I only think this because it's like you compare really Kyle's trajectory pre 2.0 and post 2.0, and it's just two completely different guys,
Yeah.
Again, I think it's due to the fact that, NXT 2.0's thing is characters, gimmicks, and O'Reilly doesn't really have one.
He doesn't, no. And he tried in 1.0 to, develop one. And, I don't know what the problem was, but it was just awkward and cringe. And I think it's funny that, they paired him with the new guy. Because you get the idea that he's supposed to help Von Wagner. But they gave Von Wagner to a guy who was he's not hot, he's cool, even before all this change.
Yeah, and even despite that, the lack of like character gimmick, like NXT 1.0, Kyle O'Reilly seemed destined to win either the North American or NXT title at one point. Whereas 2.0, it was like you didn't even know if the guy was gonna win the cruiserweight title. So it's like, and again, what I'm again, it's no disrespect, but basically what I'm trying to get at here is that, to me personally, I know some people think he has the potential, but I can't see O'Reilly as more than a tag guy, more specifically teaming with Bobby Fish as Red Dragon.
Yeah, to echo that, find it hard to see him as a singles competitor unless they like promo him in a Roman Reigns say as little as possible kind of way,
Yeah.
Because if he's flying off the cuff, it just I think they let him. I think they gave him the reins. I think they gave him the space to do that. It was never good. It was never enjoyable.
Yeah, which is the only reason I want to see him go to AEW, to just go back to
There's like a want for a reset for the guy.
Yeah, and what perfect way to reset than with was essentially for a long part of lifetime partner, in sense, Bobby Fish, And I more so want the Red Dragon reunion than an Undisputed Era reunion.
I hear you. We're giving away the cart before the horse. Let's talk about the match. What'd you think?
Honestly, this was a really impressive match to me.
Mm-hmm.
Which is to be expected, because even though they got more success in 2.0, Imperium is still technically a 1.0 team, and more so the NXT UK team.
Yeah.
And, so you're throwing them in with O'Reilly. It was already set to be a great match. And, like, I don't want to sound mean, but I'm purposely leaving Von Wagner out, because though he had some decent spots in the match, the main highlights were whenever it was any of the Imperium guys facing off with O'Reilly, because they know how to get technical. As they mentioned at the end, to the how would I say this? I don't know how to say this, but I know you brought it up once, how you don't like when a match finishes and the commentary team tries to say, "Oh, this was a classic," or "This is one that's gonna be remembered for the ages." They mentioned at the end saying it was like a technical masterpiece or something like that, but as much as I don't like them mentioning it, it still really was I wouldn't call it a masterpiece, but it was definitely a good technical showcase whenever those three guys were going at it.
It was a technical showcase whenever those three guys went at it. I went in, Jack. I said, let's see what these got. And he did he did that spot where he jumps over O'Reilly to he kind of leapfrogs.
Yeah.
While O'Reilly's got him hung up on the ropes. And it was bad. And it was really bad. He missed a really easy move that didn't look good. And I don't think it's a move to give a guy who's 7 feet tall. But every time I thought the match was going to end, O'Reilly had one of those other guys wrapped up in a chokehold, in a toe hold. He was working overtime. Frankly, he wanted to win the belts. I'm like, please, God, don't put these belts on these two, on Von Wagner.
Yeah, and funny enough, similar to, oh my gosh, who am I thinking of that, Cross, who was appearing on the main roster while he had the title. A couple weeks ago, I'm pretty sure Von Wagner appeared on SmackDown as Adam Pearce's, bodyguard in a sense. So it's people were like, oh, I assume he's getting called up soon, or something. But yeah, it was watching this, I was just let Imperium retain, and get these other two, Kyle and Vaughn, just separated from each other. It's not working out the way they wanted it to.
No, it was supposed to be buddies, we were bonding over outdoor life or something or other. I don't watch. But it's here, Jack. I will raise my concern about the developmental aspect of NXT 2.0 because Von Wagner is very much so being developed. And I'm happy to accept the world where he is being developed. I'm happy to celebrate his growth and his development. But I don't think you develop a guy by putting him in a championship match a month into his existence.
Yeah, and let's not forget, the first night of NXT 2.0, he was thrown into that fatal 4-way NXT championship match too. So it's like, I don't think these are the best ways to help a guy develop and more so get him over with the crowd.
You know, I think he went over like a fart in church, right? He didn't get the Gigi Dolan responses. And so, yeah, here's a huge, I think, problem with like how they're approaching this developmental brand. I'll develop him, fine. Put him up against people who aren't going to make him look bad because these guys made him look bad.
Yeah. You know.
Oh, so we got to get to this part, Jack, because I have no faith in Von Wagner. I am shut down. What does he do, Jack? They lose this match, and Imperium retain their tag team championships. And then what does Von Wagner do, Jack?
So he's helping Kyle up, and you hear all the chants, you know, from the crowd because, you know, they pretty much believe this is Kyle's last show, you know?
Yep.
Or last, like, at least big pay-per-view show. So they're chanting, thank you, Kyle, you know? He's like, essentially it looks like giving him his moment. And then it's partly due to the camera work, but he really starts giving it away as, like, for, like, a good 5 seconds before he attacks. He starts preparing and showing he's going to attack Kyle. And then, you know, he finally tries to, and Kyle just turns it around on him and beats him up.
Jack, he couldn't even turn on a guy. He couldn't even do that right. Kyle O'Reilly sees it coming from a mile away. Kyle O'Reilly doesn't need the cameras, Jack. Kyle O'Reilly just knows what's coming. That's the best part of this whole thing, was O'Reilly being like smart baby face and getting the better of the very green Von Wagner. After the match, Kyle O'Reilly challenges him to a cage match this Tuesday, and I think old O'Reilly is going to get written off TV, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, the moment I saw that too later in the show, I told my dad and went, oh, so that's how they're writing Kyle out of NXT canon.
Goodness gracious. I hope Von Wagner comes. I hope he wakes up on Tuesday and chooses violence. You know what I mean? Like, here's hoping he's got a good showing because he's big. And, like, that's all I could say about him. So, work towards that. Be big. Goodness.
Yeah, and, you know, gotta throw in the quick mention of how Kyle throws up the UE sign and says, this is a brotherhood, before randomly doing the DX suck it chop.
You know, it's funny. It's like he realized in that moment how ineffective the UE pose is to convey anything. You know, where like, it's like, I want to tell you off. This is the wrong gesture to tell you off. You know who had a good gesture to tell people off? Stone Cold and DX.
Yeah, but so I thought it was a really great tag match when Von Wagner wasn't a part of the match.
I'll tell you what, Jack, it was technically good. I hated it because of how sure I was that this company was going to put these belts on a guy who needs to leave and a guy who just got there. They had me, Jack. I'm like, oh my, how? But then both of them, Eichner and Bartel, just powering out of stuff. I'm like, this is incredible. What a great showing for these guys.
Yeah. And real quick, with about 20 seconds left, we'll close out here. Tune into part 2 of the next episode where we'll cover the rest of this card.
Let's go.